Hello and welcome to the Manchester is Red podcast. My name is Steven Railston. We're recording this episode on a Monday afternoon, one day after United drew 1-1 with Ipswich Town in the Premier League down at Portman Road. Me and Samuel Luckhurst were down at that game in East Anglia. He's joining me on this podcast as usual. We're going to give our thoughts on the game and dissect it in some detail, and it'll go on for two parts. First of all, Samuel, how are you? Had a very long journey yesterday and you seem a bit more yourself, yeah, this morning or this afternoon, I should say, after a long journey. You were a bit unwell, weren't you?
I lost my voice coming back, as you know, and my voice is still not back to normal, as people can probably detect from that. Even listening back to myself in the press conference when I asked Amorim a question, I thought, who the hell is that? I don't remotely sound like myself. So yeah, there's a winter bug of some sort going round, but
Was it
Solskjaer
the
got to
illness,
Ipswich and
or,
back.
or was it singing along to Natasha Bedingfield Unwritten on the way back that made you lose your voice? That's the question.
Well, I can confirm. I was singing along to one song, but it was not. It was definitely not Natasha Bedingfield. You know, I've had some good playlists on these long journeys, and yours was decent, but there were some pretty major flaws in there. Cyndi Lauper being another one. So yeah, Rich Fay's playlist was much missed, I think, to an extent.
The very long journeys he's on there. It's a 4-hour journey there and then another 4 hours on the way back, but we'll make the most of it. We'll have some fun on the way down. Right, let's
Yes.
talk about the game. A very different formation as expected. Ruben Amorim promised that fans would see an idea. Samuel at Portman Road, we saw that from the first whistle. I mean, even before the first whistle, to be fair, because well, I'm sure we'll get onto it. But United changed the pre-match routine, which was quite interesting. Having said that, though, it was a similar performance from what we've seen this season. The second half was pretty underwhelming, and I think the draw was probably the fair result in the end.
Well, Ipswich had a greater goal threat throughout the whole game. United didn't really trouble them too much after the first 80 seconds when they got that goal. And as I said to you, it was deja vu in that it was Rashford getting an early goal under a new manager, as he did under Solskjaer at Cardiff nearly 6 years ago when he scored in the third minute. He was a little bit earlier yesterday in the second minute, but United just didn't build on that, and they should have gone in for the kill. They didn't have the just the it almost felt like they didn't have the wherewithal to do it, which is odd because they did, but they operated as if they didn't. I thought in the first 15 minutes you could see the makings of an identity there, as you said, like all those red shirts, they were positioned perfectly. There there was a structure to what they wanted to do. It seemed like the players were pretty attentive to what Amorim wanted. But then once they kind of relinquished control and allowed Ipswich to get a foothold in the game, the equaliser was coming. And Onana, who I'm sure we'll get onto later on, made a couple of good saves before the equaliser went in. The second half was a weird non-event. It just meandered into a draw in the end, and there was quite a raucous cheer at full time from the Ipswich fans because it was a positive result for them. I know they've drawn too many games already. They've only won one game in the league all season, and long term, I don't think that's going to serve them particularly well. But of course, they're going to be encouraged by getting a point against United. But watching Amorim was quite educational. I mean, we had a good view. We were in terms of that tactical vantage point, but also being pretty much directly above him, we could see how he was conducting himself in the technical area. He doesn't seem to be. I don't think he was that animated yesterday. He wasn't that visibly vexed. I think there was a measure of control and calmness about him. But there were times where he would, he couldn't contain his exasperation at some of the things he was seeing. And when you see that he's having to give them a rollicking for not pressing later on in the game, you think, unfortunately for him, he's going to have to get used to that because this team have been useless at pressing for a long, long time, probably dating back 15 years. And when there was that familiar sight of when a United player cedes possession, shoulders slump, heads go down, and they're not tracking back quickly enough. So Amorim had to clap them to almost try and jolt them into sprinting back, chasing back with more intensity. And as he was at pains to stress afterwards, they only had 3 days. They had a lot to take on, and you do give them a bit of leeway. But what I would say on that is that the two best, probably the only two good or respectable outfield performers were Mazraoui and Ahmad, who of course playing out of position effectively. Ahmad was playing in a new role, which I think he's got potential to be very good in. Mazraoui has played in 4 different roles already now this season and has had a pretty decent season so far. And I thought that continued yesterday, despite that luckless deflection off his crown. So you can't really cut the others too much slack. Rashford seemed to think a goal after 80 seconds accounted for 90 minutes work. He regressed almost as soon as he scored, really. Fernandes expended as much energy protesting and complaining as he did playing, it felt like. Garnacho needs to cut out the theatrics at times, and I thought that certainly in the second half early on when he didn't play the ball to Rashford when he should have done, that was just poor. You can't excuse him just because he's a 20-year-old in that situation. That was just selfishness. It was a poor piece of play, whatever the age of the winger or an inside forward, whatever his role is now. I wouldn't say Amorim was completely absolved of blame for that performance. I just didn't understand the midfield selection. I thought that at least one of Mainu and Ugarte would have started. Mainu, given that he trained on Monday, you'd have thought that he'd have played some part in that game, but he didn't. And I think you said afterwards he looked quite downbeat when he left the stadium, having been completely unused. And okay, his hand was forced with a back three because, yes, again, there's another minor defensive crisis with United centre-backs. And already it's becoming quite startling how often Matthijs de Ligt fails to take command of defender-striker duels. And that was another example yesterday. I thought Liam Delap gave him a real chasing.
I think my takeaway at full time was at least it was the beginning of an identity there. We talked about Erik ten Hag and his failure to kind of implement a style and an identity during his 2.5 years at the club, spent over 400 million, and that just wasn't good enough. And we used the word fascinating a lot in this podcast, but it was watching United in those opening 15, 20 minutes, seeing where the players were, seeing where they were trying to pass to and the positions that were taken up was fascinating. I actually quite enjoyed it. And as you said, we had a really good kind of position up high in that press box to look down and see what was going on, seeing what Amorim was trying to do. Ahmed obviously started at right wing back. Dalot got the nod on the left. And I think you saw in the first half the kind of the advantages and disadvantages of playing a winger in one of those roles, didn't you, Samuel, with Ahmad? Because his run for the first goal was fantastic. It's great to see that the international break hasn't disrupted his momentum because he was so good in that little spell under Ruud van Nistelrooy. Those 4 games, he really excelled. A brilliant assist, but then later on in the half, the ball goes over his head. His positioning wasn't the best, and obviously Onana bails him out with that save to deny Liam Delap. But considering all that, though, Samuel, it's his first time playing a right wing back, Ahmad. It was a very pleasing performance, I thought. He was United's bright spark, wasn't he? Along with Mazraoui from the outfield players.
It was decent going, and Amorim said afterwards that he'd made a lot of improvement on the defensive side in only 3 days of training, which is why when you hear that, and that's coming straight from the manager, that leeway, you feel you're inclined to give some of the players as they're adjusting to a new formation, new system. You think, well, cracky, if a 22-year-old is coming on leaps and bounds in just 3 training sessions, maybe we shouldn't be too kind to them in terms of giving them that amount of leeway. He also had that run right at the end where he almost not almost maybe, but he threatened to get a late winning goal when he came inside. And I think that's the advantage of having him in that team. You can have him doing what he was doing in terms of hugging the touchline and creating the goal for Rashford. But as the game goes on, if he's still involved, of course, he can drift. He's got to have license to drift inside because that's where he's been at his most devastating, not just for United, but during that loan spell for Sunderland as well. He's very dynamic when he cuts in. He's very direct as well. He's got that incisive play about him as well, which United's attacks certainly it needs because it doesn't have anywhere near enough of that. And okay, those, I know Amorim said earlier in the week last week that those two wide roles would probably be occupied by fullbacks, because it's easier to teach a fullback to be defensive minded and attack minded. I think he said, or words to that degree, and I understand that, but I also think that you've got to try and get the balance right. And I think if it's two fullbacks, I think you're possibly restricting yourself. And that was why I was pleased to see that Ahmad was in one of those positions yesterday, because I think he has got potential, whether it's on the right or whether it's on the left as well. I mean, I think in my ideal lineup, I had him down on the left, just for the sake of having that natural width, and I'm sure he would do pretty well there as well. But of course, he has been developed and grown up in Atalanta's academy, and he was bought by United as a right-sided forward. So if you want to play to his strengths, that's absolutely fine. And you saw that with the goal yesterday. He did get caught out for that chance that Delap had in the first half just before Ipswich equalised, where he got turned far too easily. And you saw there and then that's why he's an auxiliary wing back. But he's a player. He's one of the few players who's having a good season. And I know his contract situation, although it's technically up in the summer, there is that +1 option, but he is a player that United should really be nailing down for the long term, because it was before yesterday, it was easy to see why Amorim would take a shine to him and why he would want to maximise him, and obviously he did that yesterday.
Yeah, fair play to Ahmad. He's continuing to go from strength to strength, isn't he? At the moment, we'll move on to Amorim kind of being on Garnacho's case. Then Samuel, it wasn't really tough love, was it? It was just kind of coaching, but it was constant throughout that first 45 minutes of the game. Garnacho was obviously on Amorim's side, and it just shows you, I think, how much the players have to learn in this new system. He's only had 2 proper sessions with the full squad, and he's trying to implement a full new strategy and formation and a way of playing. And it's going to take a little bit of time to learn. That is just natural. And he was in Garnacho's, all the time, wasn't he, in the first half? I mean, we couldn't stop looking down and seeing it, observing it. If there was a break in play, Garnacho would come across, speak with Hammer again. And that was fascinating again, really, to spot that at Portman Road.
Well, the front three went with was the front three I would have gone with, in that it's the 2 starting strikers. I was pleased that he didn't go with either of those 2, because I just don't think they're good enough to be starter strikers for United. I don't think Marcus Rashford is good enough to be a long-term starter striker, but he needed to vary it up there. And that did, it was vindicated inside 80 seconds. And as I said earlier, Rashford did regress. So after that, as we've come to expect from him, really, during games where he can't get that level of consistency, but it was the right call. Fernandes was always going to play. Garnacho, I think, has been United's best outfield player this season, even though he's had some patchy periods here and there. And of course, with Garnacho, it's going to be trickier, I think, as a 20-year-old who's just been a pure winger, it feels like, since he came over to England and came into United's academy. And that's the way he's been developed. And Manchester United have a huge history of wingers and developing wingers, particularly teenage wingers, come through the academy and then breaking into the first team. And now he's having to adjust to an inside forward role where you're playing more like a playmaker. But it is possible. We saw Pedro do it with Chelsea when him and Eden Hazard were playing behind Diego Costa, I think it was, in when they won the title in 2016-17. It's a very different dynamic with Garnacho, in that he's a much younger player than Pedro was. I think Pedro must have been 29, 30 maybe at the time. And of course, he'd won Champions Leagues with Barcelona. He'd won major tournaments with Spain as well. He's extremely experienced. And Garnacho is pretty much at the opposite end when it comes down to that. But there are still times where you look at Garnacho, and I thought that he certainly could have been doing better in terms of his understanding, being a bit more intuitive. I think a lot of what we saw yesterday, there was almost a counterintuitive chaos about United. The chaos wasn't massively obvious, I think, to people watching on TV. But when you see Amorim having to tell players where to stand, where to go to when you've got the ball, where you've got to go to when you've not got the ball, I don't think it should be that hard. And he said on Friday, he tried to simplify it, saying whether it's a back 4, back 3, back 5, it's still the same principles. And I can understand why he's trying to simplify it, because he doesn't want it to seem too onerous for the players. Yet these players are clearly not particularly intuitive. There's a reason why they finished 8th in the Premier League last season. There's a reason why they're under a new coach. a third of the way into this season. And the irony, I suppose, is that Garnacho has been one of the better performers, but that is a mini project there for Amorim, in that he obviously needs to maximise a very talented player and someone that United, have invested a lot in terms of developing him since he came to Manchester just over 4 years ago. And he's had I maintain that the 2 years he's had in the first team, it's just been an upwards curve, his trajectory. And I still think that's the case. I don't think he's plateaued at any point this season. I think he's had a pretty decent season, even though he has also squandered some very good chances along the way. But he is a 20-year-old, and I think there's a lack of understanding, certainly among maybe younger football fans or the content creator faction of football fans who can't recall or don't remember or don't maybe not even watched Cristiano Ronaldo when he was a 20-year-old at Manchester United, and the inconsistencies you get with 20-year-olds when they're operating at the most scrutinised sporting institution on the planet. And Garnacho has done very, very well so far. And having done that well, you expect him to get better. So when there's the slightest trough, it feels like some people are unnecessarily on his case. But that example, as I mentioned earlier in the second half yesterday, where the ball went through, and I think Garnacho and Rashford were still inside United's half. Ipswich were that high up. You have got to maximise opportunities like that. United should be going 2-1 up there. You've got to.
I thought his decision making was poor, Samuel, if I'm honest, in the game. There was a couple of moments, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was.
They had a breakaway, and if you played the pass a little bit sooner or made a better decision, United could have capitalised. But that was quite disappointing for me. He was obviously kept on when the initial changes were made, though, wasn't he? So.
Yeah, and I mean, Amorim was proactive with his substitutions. I mean, they didn't all. Clearly, they didn't all work. I mean, Shaw, he wants to build up into form, and you'd think if Shaw is fit and firing, you'd rather have him in the back three on the left hand side than Johnny Evans, because Johnny Evans did struggle yesterday as someone who's turning 37 in January is bound to against a pretty physical and an energetic side. So I can understand bringing Shaw in. One question that really probably won't ever get answered as well. Ugarte, whenever he plays for Uruguay, he always seems to be late coming back. Ten Hag said he was the last to get back after the September internationals. Amorim yesterday said he only had one team training session. Well, why is that? When he last played for Uruguay, that was Tuesday night, South American
is it logistically? Because I looked at the last international break, actually. It's an interesting point. And I looked at when he would be flying back and when he could possibly arrive back in Manchester. The thing is, Casemiro's not in the Brazil squad at the moment, is he? And Anthony isn't. So we've got no South American players in the squad to compare to, really. I can't remember ever happening to... Oh, yeah, he was with Argentina, wasn't he? I suppose. But
I know Martinez withdrew away with him.
Yeah, but you're right. Garnacho was back, and so it is interesting. It's a good point, and you're right. You're putting that.
Martinez started against Southampton and Brentford, which were the first games back after the September and October internationals. Garnacho came off the bench against Southampton, scored. He started the Brentford game. So that's two South American players who were away in South America, came back, started. And I know with Ten Hag, he had a distrust of Ugarte. He clearly didn't really fancy him. But already I'm looking at Ugarte, I'm thinking, why am I getting shades of Edson Cavani here, who was 30-something, who was just passing through, taking United for a ride, spent as much time in Uruguay as he did in Manchester. Ugarte should be getting back to Manchester ASAP. And I know he'll have his recovery time, and I know there's a time zone difference, etc., etc. But that's twice now, and two different managers have suggested or said effectively that he was late coming back. Why is that happening? There are a lot of issues at United, and in the grand scheme of things, that's probably one of the more minor ones. But it is an important one if they want to be at the elite level again, because Ugarte is seen as he's the long-term number 6 for them. But every time there's an international break, next game back, he's not going to start in it. And the case of Cavani, there was that time infamously where he just didn't even bother coming back for the FA Cup tie against Middlesbrough, because it was like, well, it's only Middlesbrough in the FA Cup. What happens? United go out to them having lost on a penalty shootout, and the guy who missed the penalty was Anthony Elanga, who may not have taken one if Cavani could have been bothered to come back from Uruguay quickly enough.
I think everyone had Manu and Ugarte down as starting against Ipswich. I definitely think that's what I expected. It seemed the logical choice. And for Amorim to go with two 32-year-olds in midfield was obviously a surprise. Amari Hutchinson's goal, the equaliser just before half-time, it obviously deflected off Mazraoui. But there was a moment there when I think if Casemiro was 10 years younger and he's not done for two, he could probably get a bit closer. Maybe I'm being a bit harsh because it was a good opening from Hutchinson. He kind of cut inside with it was an impressive touch. However, I think Casemiro probably could have done better. Does Manu or Ugarte stop that? That's the question. And I think looking ahead to Thursday, changes are going to have to be made in that midfield. You can't stick with Casemiro and Eriksen, can you?
No, you've just got to change it up completely. It's just got to be Ugarte and Manu. I don't think much. That's not even one for debate, really. I'd be pretty staggered if anyone was thinking, yeah, let's continue with Casemiro and Eriksen after how they got on at Ipswich at the weekend. I know Amorim is learning on the job a little bit in terms of trying to understand who's going to be particularly important this season and beyond. But and of course, Manu's just come back from injury, so there's the element of easing him back. Ugarte came back from South America, doesn't start whenever he comes back from South America, so there's that to factor into it. I get all that, but I thought that it was it was just clearly a miscalculation to go with Casemiro and Eriksen. I'd have understood if it was. I mean, Casemiro obviously was in that team training session on the Monday, but so was Manu, and that you go back to last year, and I know Ten Hag could be very flawed in terms of his handling of players regarding injury, but Manu, his full debut in the Premier League was the game straight after the November internationals at Goodison Park, and he was brilliant.
Yeah,
so
it was
and that was his first game in 4 months, wasn't it?
It was a surprise not to see him come on the pitch, wasn't it? And like I
Yeah.
said, when he came through the mix zone, he did look a bit disappointed. I thought his face, which was a shame. Look, I think he'll start on Thursday night, and hopefully he'll kick on from there after the little injury that he's had. We'll just end this part of a word on Onana then Samuel, because we've touched on him. Another wonderful performance. I thought some excellent saves again, and I've just done my lunch piece there on Onana being the best player for United this season. And again, that nobody would have predicted that. We didn't see that coming. When you think about his first few months at the club, I think last winter was the turning point, wasn't it? Because he endured a really bad might be a bit harsh, but a difficult 3-4 months. And I think that's the word he used himself when describing that period. Difficult, didn't he? He lacked confidence. He didn't look convincing. He made a series of errors in the Champions League group stage. And he's gone from costing United points to saving them points now. And he looks like a really convincing goalkeeper. And again, he's impressed me this season. He really has.
I think the turning point for him was when he talked to me at the City
No,
ground.
I think it was Anfield. He was the first goalkeeper to keep a clean sheet, wasn't he, last season at Anfield? At that stage. Yeah,
I'm obviously jesting. No, it was a lot later than that, because certainly looking at his, you look at January, obviously played against Tottenham before he went away on AFCON duty, and he had a dreadful AFCON with Cameroon that he turned up for the first game. They decided not to play him. He started in the second game. I think he made a pretty bad mistake when Sadio Mane scored, and then he was dropped, and he wasn't the first choice for their remaining matches, and came back to United. And I seem to think that, I think Wolves' equaliser at Molineux, he was suspect for that, and he made a mistake early on in that second half where he came for an aerial ball and was beaten to it. So he was still having some iffy performances in January, February time. But certainly from towards the running of last season, he wasn't as obviously bad at times as he was in the first months, and there must have been probably a dozen savable goals he let in last season.
Well,
not necessarily all of them.
I think in the Champions League, he gifted away that penalty, didn't he, when he passed out and Casemiro got sent off against Galatasaray. He dropped the ball from Leroy Sané going through his hands, and then Galatasaray away the 3-3 when Ziyech scores the free kick. That was probably the worst one for me.
He had an extraordinary group stage in that he was responsible for United's only win, effectively, with the sudden death save from Jordan Larsson, his penalty against Copenhagen. Yet he was responsible for, heavily responsible for the Bayern Munich defeat, the Galatasaray defeat, the Galatasaray draw, and and that that's kind of enough, really. He had an extraordinarily eventful group stage, to put it mildly, given the amount of goals that United conceded in those 6 games, and just how dramatic those matches were as well. But I thought coming into this season that he would be more dependable, just because he had a season under his belt and he was settled. Going back to that chat that a couple of us had with him at the City Ground in February, he said how he'd had a difficult 6 months off the pitch, settling in, not necessarily on it, even though it was clearly difficult on it as well. But he was talking about the mental side of things, and he's a really lovely bloke as well. He's so amiable and so engaging when he speaks to you, and as you know as well from chatting to him in mixed zones. And
What you were going to mention then, the
no,
Brighton last day of the season.
no, I'm being extremely sincere. Like, when this is an example of when we're actually permitted to speak with footballers, more often than not, we come away rooting for them, and that was certainly the case with Onana when I spoke to him at Forest back in I think it was late February, and I was completely supportive of United letting De Gea go and bringing in a more modern goalkeeper. I think they did get an upgrade in Onana overall. Okay, De Gea I think he'll always be a better shot stopper, because there have been few in my lifetime who've been better at actually keeping the ball out of the goal. But Onana is also pretty good at that, as he showed a handful of times last season. It's certainly become a lot more regular this season. He's made some world-class saves against Fenerbahce and Crystal Palace.
Yeah.
And he's also made important saves. The penalty save against Southampton at 0-0, that one-on-one against Porto when it was 3-2. United obviously got a late equaliser. And yesterday, you were hoping for his sake and Amorim's sake and United's sake that those saves he was making would allow United to kick on and get a win. But in the end, he was breached. But he still made another good stop early in the second half from Delap. And I don't know who the man of the match was yesterday from the rights holders, but he'd have been worthy of it.
Yeah, he did really well to actually make himself so big, close down the angle, and it hit it off his bicep, didn't it? The lap shot. Unfortunately, concedes a few minutes later, but as I said, you could do nothing about that.
No.
I'm chuffed for him. He's a really nice guy, comes across really well, as you say, when he speaks to us and when he does other interviews. And I think I turned to you after that, the lap save, and his name was began to be sung from the away end. Which I believe is the first time that's been audible in the stadium as well.
Yeah.
So that was nice to see. His popularity is increasing, isn't it?
Indeed, and I think he's, you look at the way he conducts himself, his body language, how, as I said, how affable he is, and he's a good character. I mean, for that dressing room, it's certainly lacked good characters in recent years, but they've certainly got one in Onana, and he's earned that. I think there's probably no greater compliment really for a player than having their name chanted by supporters, and it was probably overdue given the way he's playing this season, but he got it yesterday, and that should also fuel his confidence.
Onana's been helping his teammates, and they probably need to return the favour, don't they, for the remainder of the season. We'll leave it there for part one. We'll be back in a moment for part two. Welcome back to part two of the Manchester is Red podcast. Should we focus now, Samuel, a little bit on the defence? I mentioned that kind of drill before the game when the back five or the back three were warming up, and they set out some fluorescent cones, and it was kind of a pressing drill, and they were practicing keeping their shape as a five. It's really interesting to watch. De Ligt, though, I would say, struggled during the game when it started. We talked in the car, there was a lot of talk before the international break about the kind of improvements that he'd made, but the caveat is it wasn't exactly a test and run, that was it. Those 4 games under Van Nistelrooy. You just mentioned Evans struggled as well, but Mazraoui had a good game. And I thought, when I looked at that defensive line at the start of the game, I thought if they keep a clean sheet, they've done very well, because it was a makeshift back line. Lenny Euro wasn't in the squad, unfortunately. We thought he might make the cut. Lisandro Martinez was out, and of course Harry Maguire is still recovering from a muscle injury, and he was absent. So they've still got key players missing in the back line.
Yeah, and Amorim's already encountered what Ten Hag encountered last season, having an injury crisis at centre half with 4 of them 4 of the senior centre halves being unavailable yesterday. So his hand was forced. He was always going to go with a back three, and I suppose the other way he could have gone about it was put Shaw straight back in. But I think it was clear from what he said about Shaw in the week that he wasn't going to start him, which is sensible for someone who hadn't played in, was it 9 months? I think it was
18th of February.
Yeah. So that's how long he'd been out for United. Of course, he managed to turn up for England at the Euros, but he got injured as soon as he came back to United in the summer. So he was never going to play yesterday, and I think it's a credit to Mazraoui really that he's played in 4 different positions already this season. After I think United have played 18 or 19 games this season, he's played at right back, left back.
He's not had a bad game, has he? This season, I can't think of a game where I thought he struggled. To be honest,
no. I mean, I'm sure he didn't play well against Tottenham or Liverpool.
But he didn't stand out, and you think, oh yeah, he was glaringly bad. Do you know what I'm trying to say?
It's not like no. I completely agree. Like, you think of the Liverpool game, you think of Casemiro, you think of the Tottenham game, you think of Fernandes before he got sent off. So yeah, I think that's kind of the backhanded compliment to him, but the greater compliment is that he's come in a pretty difficult situation for the club in general, and certainly with there not being a fit left back for the first 3 months of the season. I know he had the benefit of playing at right back for the most of those games, but he settled in very well. He's looked defensively solid. I think he's starting to show a little bit more in the final third. What Ten Hag said about him in the summer, about how he's very good against teams who press against him. You saw that again yesterday. He's a very, very skillful fullback, and he manages to get out of trouble quite cannily. And he's for the money they paid for him, it's actually been shrewd business so far, and hopefully for his sake and United's sake, he continues in that vein. But De Ligt is, I'd certainly qualms about United signing 2 players that Bayern Munich wanted to sell. And okay, with Mazraoui so far so good, but De Ligt is one I hoped for United's sake they wouldn't go down that line, just because of his association with Ten Hag, and also clearly having looked at his pretty gradual decline over 5 years. He was a player that they were signing on the basis of what he did 5 years ago under Ten Hag rather than what he had done in the past 5 years. And of course, there's a lot of context behind that in terms of the amount of managers he's played and the styles that he's had to adapt to in Italy and Germany. But if Juventus want to sell a player after 3 years and Bayern Munich want to sell a player after 2 years, those are red flags. And as you said, he was doing decently of late, but he's not overall been decent this season. I think he's looking like, certainly if you're a starting Premier League striker at most clubs, or you've got the general characteristics that a striker requires, he seems quite easy to get past. Sorry,
he's not very agile, is he? He turns slowly.
And we've said this before in terms of centre-backs in the Premier League, you always need a pacey option there. And United haven't really had that for... I'm trying to think of the last... Christ, would it have been Bailly, possibly?
It's a long time.
Maguire's not...
But then you caveat by his pace quick with the clangers that he threw in. If you're talking about a pacey quality defender, it's probably 10 years ago, wasn't it?
Yeah, I'm going back to Bailly first season, which is 8 seasons ago. So that's... And United have signed a lot of centre-backs since then. And Martez is not slow, but he's not rapid. Lindelof's not quick. Maguire's not particularly quick at all. Varane was quick, but when he came to United, there were times when you'd watch him last season and he would run and he wouldn't sprint, because it was almost as if he was fearful that if he actually embarked on a sprint, he would break down again, given how injury prone he'd been. And De Ligt, he's a big guy, he's very physical, but I thought Liam Delap bullied him yesterday, and certainly for that chance early in the second half, he was all over the place. And so come next year, or in the summer certainly, if you're playing with a back three, which clearly Amorim is going to want to do as long as he's manager of United, you would think, or head coach of United. He's going to need 5 senior options just because you're going to need at least 2 to provide that cover when 3 are starting. And Lindelof's got to be released. I think it's probably advisable that Johnny Evans will be released, given that he'll be 37 and a half come the summer. Maguire, there's a decision to be made there because they have got the +1 option on his deal, but he has become injury prone. He's only played in 9 of their 19 matches this season. He missed quite a few games last season as well, through some different injuries. So if they want to, they can halve their central defensive department next summer. And I certainly don't think that United's starting defensive trio at the start of next season should be De Ligt, Yoro, and Martinez. I think they've got to be looking for an upgrade there. And the player who you'd be looking to bring out of it would be De Ligt, because Martinez, although he's not had a good start to this season, I think playing him on the left of a back 3 with his passing range when it's back to normal, because it's been iffy this season, and Yoro on the other side, and a real top draw centre back in between them, I think that's got greater potential than just trying to stick by someone that they signed for the previous manager, because that's the other issue they've got with De Ligt. They would not have signed. Let's face it, they would not have signed him if the manager wasn't Ten Hag.
The market's difficult, isn't it? When you think of that player, Samuel, who could actually be in the centre of a 3, and Jared Bramford has obviously been interested in him. He's still a very young player, though. United, as we said in the car, they need players who can come in and be immediate successes.
He's also been injury prone recently.
Yeah, he's not really played for Everton, has he? So who is that player in the market? And you look at Arsenal, for example, who have now got Saliba and Gabriel, and it's taking them time to kind of develop them and have trust in them. And it's taken them a few years to get to the level where they're at now. Is it the case that United might have to accept that and go, well, look, this is a 3-year project with Amorim. We might have to get a player like that in?
Player like what in?
Someone who's got something to work on, who needs to develop to get to that top level, instead of someone who is immediately ready to excel and really be a leader in that team.
Quite possibly, but as I said, I think they'll need 2 centre backs next summer, and it would be illogical, as you probably agree, for them to get 2 of the same profile. So if you could get, I don't know, someone of Branthwaite's mould, someone who's of that age where there's a lot of long-term potential, and then you get someone who is a lot more experienced and is going to be is a good character, has been around the block a bit, but is still quite sprightly and has the right attributes to be.
Can we put Johnny Evans in like an age machine and just make him take 6 years off him or 7 years off him and put him back on the pitch?
No, I wouldn't do that, because I think people forget how bad he was during his final years at United. There's a lot of cognitive dissonance going on there, just because he's Irish and he came through the United Academy and he won some titles. It's amazing if you're a title winner at Man United, it's almost as if you gained legendary status.
Was Johnny Evans 7 years ago not getting linked with City? He wasn't he? There was interest briefly.
He was, but he didn't join. He didn't join them. When he left United, he went to West Brom. There's a reason why the 2 clubs who were in for him when he left United were West Brom and Everton. And again, people forget that. But yeah, there was some interest from City but I think the caveat to that is it's evolved with City centre back since then. But back then, Otamendi was an important player to Guardiola. Now, Otamendi is a bad defender, but he's a decent footballer, and as we've seen with Guardiola, he can take defenders and make them just look better, or just make them better. I mean, Vardy is a great example of that last season. I think any other manager or coach in the world would just see this guy come from Croatia and how imposing he is and think, right, he's my centre back for the next 5 or 6 years. Guardiola has to, because the contrarian that he is, he has to do something different. It's like, no, you're going to be my top left back, my marauding left back. Then you're going to be scoring goals. You'll score goals away from home all the time. I think my poorly voice is possibly.
I was going to say that. I don't think your illness is helping it.
Yeah. So that's an example of the project you can do with a relatively young centre back, and I think it's fair to say that with the interest in Branthwaite in the summer, that was more in your sled than Ten Hag led. But it's something that you can imagine United will revisit in the summer. I mean, there's no chance of anything going on there in the winter. I saw something about that I think it was last week. How I mean, just the prospect of United trying to sign a £70 million centre back in January when they've got 6 centre backs as it is, just not going to happen.
And here we are, though, Samuel, talking about the need to sign 2 centre halves, and it just feels like Groundhog Day every season. We're on the podcast halfway through the campaign, and we're talking about this position needs addressed. They need to sign this player, but the money that they've got can only go around so far. And Joshua Zirkzee came on yesterday, blared that shot over the bar. Did it go out the stand? I'm not actually sure where it went. We discussed it on the way back home in the car, and you made the point on the podcast recently that you just cut your losses immediately, get rid of them in the summer. I feel like my principles make me think that every player should be given a season. But having said that, I agree with what you say in the sense that if United want to sign another striker in the summer, which they're going to need to do, then they're going to need to sell someone, and Xerxes is the logical choice to sell. I completely get that argument.
Yeah, I mean, you ask your dad about Stefan Guivarc'h. Did he want to give Stefan Guivarc'h a season at Newcastle, or did he just want him out? And I suspect the answer would be the latter. There, I'm struggling to think of a more recent reference to a misfiring Newcastle. Albert Luque. That's another one.
Bit
I
of a
don't know if
cult
you remember
era,
him.
so I'm not sure Xerxes will achieve that status.
So you just watch Xerxes, and the startling thing as well. We saw it in the 93rd minute. Amorim was having to tell him to get in the box, and he is purportedly a striker. I think I'm at the point now where I'm convinced he's not a striker. There's no point even referring to him as a striker. And I know there's been that debate.
He's kind of said that himself, hasn't
he? Yeah. But I think it's at the point now where if I was a sub-editor and someone referred to him as a striker, I'd probably omit the word for something else.
Forward's probably
being
appropriate,
professional.
I feel. Well, yeah, I see what you're trying to go for.
Yeah, I think if £36.5 million cart horse Joshua Zirkzee, that would be far too unkind. But United fans have said stuff to that degree so far. But the fact that we saw that, and then Amorim said afterwards in one of the several interviews that he did that he was having to tell Zirkzee as well. And you think this is a 23-year-old who has played in Germany, Italy, Belgium, and now England. He's apparently a striker, and he has to be told to get into the box when the game's 1-1, and it's pretty apparent that Manchester United would want to beat Ipswich. Maybe Xerxes thought, oh, it's not bad getting a draw at Ipswich. I really don't know. But they have made a major cock up with that deal. I will be pleasantly surprised if he becomes a success at United, because I just don't see it. And we've been through it all before. And it was interesting that Amorim decided not to start either of those two players that Ten Hag signed yesterday, Xerxes or Rasmus Højlund. I mean, with Højlund, who I think Amorim said something about him as well in terms of his positioning, and that has been a problem this season. I mean, a lot about United yesterday. What you saw about them, and it's been the case for a long time, is that they're a reactive team. They're not a proactive team. And Amorim pretty much said as much on Friday when he was saying about their performances last season. How the first half would be dreadful, and then they do something without any tactical intervention or tweak in the second half and perform. And that's why United are a reactive team. And Højlund is a reactive player. He doesn't anticipate things. And there've been, in recent years, in Scandinavia, 3 brilliant goal scorers produced by Norway with Erling Haaland, Sweden in Alexander Isak and Victor Gyökeres. Which one did United sign? Oh, they signed the one from Denmark. The amount of times United are a punchline with transfer deals, you run out of it. And of course, the fee that they committed to spending on Højlund has to be higher than the fee that City paid for Haaland. I know there was a huge signing on fee, huge salary, etc., but it was obviously worth it. It was a higher fee than what Newcastle paid for Alexander Isak, which was 63 million, and it will be a higher fee than what Victor Gyökeres goes for next year, because of his sell-on clause. Sorry, not sell-on clause, the release clause at Sporting Lisbon, or how much he's available for, which is reputedly 63 million as well. United seem to be the only elite club that make these cock-ups and make themselves the punchline of these deals. And it's the decision making has been bad, and even under this hierarchy, it is still bad because they signed Xerxes. And okay, Mazraoui has been quite decent. De Ligt
The
hasn't
jury's
been
out,
decent.
isn't it? That's the way to describe it, I think, with De Ligt. The fair way to say it.
Can't say anything on him so far. Ugarte, we have to reserve judgment still there. It's been very, very hit and miss, to say the least. But the Xerxes deal, they just need to, I mean, if it's at all possible to get rid in January or loan someone in and loan him out, that might be the way forward. I think they might have to be quite active or proactive in the loan market if they want upgrades, because you look at that squad, it's a 28-man squad. They're doubled up in every position, and they're tripled up in some positions. I mean, centre back's an example of that. They've got 6 of them.
Højlund looks really low on confidence, I think. There was a moment in the second half when he created a yard of space. He could have had a shot, and he chose to pass instead. Yeah,
he gave the ball away, didn't he, as well?
You just want to smash your head against a laptop sometimes when you watch things like that. Just put it in the back of the net. A confident striker hits that and probably scores. And he's got the quality to do that. When he had his purple patch last year, he was doing things like that, and everyone thought, right, this is Højlund's time. He's actually becoming the player that people thought he would. But yeah, he's regressed this season, and it's not being too good. Should we end on Amorim's press conference then, Samuel? You obviously attended that. I was down in the mix zone. Some interesting quotes. He said United need to suffer. When I heard that or read that, I thought back to my interview at the weekend. I interviewed one of Amorim's former players at Casa Pia, and he said, look, at Casa Pia, we could have sat down as if it was a test on tables away from each other, and we could have noted down the positions where we're supposed to be, the passing lanes we were going to do. It was just drilled into them so well, and that is going to take time. United are going to need to suffer to get this into the players, aren't they? And it's just patience, I guess. It's the start of something new.
And in a way, it probably helped that they didn't win yesterday, because he may be an overnight sensation, but he can't work miracles overnight. And you saw that yesterday in that he said the word he used about some of the players was that they got stuck. Because he said they were thinking, where should I be? Because they're learning, obviously, this new formation, this new approach. It was quite interesting what he said about the centre backs, how previously they would go forward. Now it's holding their position when they've got the ball, I think is what he said.
He talked about Dalot playing inverted under Ten Hag, and now he's asking them to go wide. So these players have been doing one thing, and now they're doing the opposite in some cases.
Yeah, he said some details. They used to pass the ball and go forward. Even the centre backs, now they have to go back. These type of things, they start going forward and they have to think too much. Dalot used to do it, pass the ball to centre-backs, go inside, play as a midfielder. Now he has to stick to his position. It's hard for the players in 3 days to cope with everything. So you completely take that on board. And as we covered that earlier, the caveat to that is that the 2 best outfield players yesterday were players playing out of position. They adapted pretty well, Mazraoui and Ahmad. And in fairness to Amorim, he said about Ahmad's position and his remit. He said that although he said that he'd improved defensively during the training sessions, he said that in a way it was kind of simple for him, because the opponent he had all the time was the left back, which is Leif Davies, I think, which is left back. And so he said it's like a winger follows the left back. It's so much easier, I think, because he doesn't have to think, can I jump in the centre back, i.e., come inside and just cover the centre back or not. So he said he just follows one guy and goes forward, and it's like a game of man to man in that area. So although it's a different role, the way the way Amorim simplified it, he suggested that's why Ahmad performed as reasonably as he did. But I still think that ultimately a lot of these players are not going to be good enough. They're not going to be in that team. If that team does going forward, if the team does indeed go forward in both senses of the word, because it's clear they're not up to it. I mean, as I said, I completely endorsed starting Rashford as the striker yesterday, but he is a stopgap striker. He's not going to be a long-term striker. They just needed to trial someone else there, because Xerxes been pretty hopeless. Højlund's been pretty hopeless. Rashford is capricious, but he has got form for scoring under a new manager, and he did do that yesterday. The problem was after that, he didn't do an awful lot whatsoever.
Yep, unfortunately. There'll be changes on Thursday, and there'll be more changes after that one. There's going to be a lot of change coming. Could we perhaps see Anthony on Thursday, Samuel? Is that too much of a stretch? We laugh because
for the sake of those who are turning up, I hope not.
He's played less than Altay Bayındır this season. Bayındır's made 2 starts. That's around 190 minutes. And I believe Anthony's sitting around 160, which is pretty insane, isn't it, as a statistic?
180 minutes for Bayındır.
There you go. Yeah. So, we'll leave it there then, Samuel, anyways. Yeah. Thanks for your time.
Thank you very much.
And thanks to listeners as usual. We'll be back later in the week for another podcast. Take care.